Now that I have the images applied to the fronts of the pocket shrines, I'm going to apply images to these hanging wall shrines. And since this is the pattern for the top of the tin, it is also very conveniently the pattern for the interior right here. So I can get away with using the same pattern for both. But I do want to orient it differently than the ones on the top of the tin. So remember, I wrote Altoids in this direction, but now I want to write it here. And that way I know that the image should be cut this way rather than this way. Okay, so the other thing I have to deal with is that one of these two tins has the new style of top with the embossing. And while I really could probably apply this image directly into its flat tin, I really can't apply this one to this and expect it to remain flat and happy. So I've got myself a little piece of very lightweight chipboard. Could probably also do this with just plain cardstock, but this is a piece of a Rye Crisp box. And I'm just going to trace my pattern onto this chipboard twice, one for each one. Before I cut this out, I'm just going to do a little arrow like this at the top of each one, and that will tell me that this is this. I want my pieces to be oriented this way. That way, once I cut them out from this, I won't lose my way. So now I have two chipboard pieces that fit into these tins, and I've added a little B and R to my notations because I've trimmed these down so that they fit into each individual tin gracefully, and I don't want to confuse them. So now that they are a little bit different, I'm going to take the one for the red tin and lay it over the top of my artwork and kind of center it as much as possible. And trace just like I did for the pocket shrines. Okay. And it's much easier to trace around the chipboard than it was around the paper pattern. And now I'm going to cut on my pencil line. Now I have two little nicely trimmed pieces of artwork that are the same size as my chipboard pieces. And I wanted to mention before I move on that my Bristol is dense enough that the color of the chipboard isn't going to show through the areas where the artwork is white. This has Bristol, and it also has a layer of gesso over the top. So it's gonna cover pretty well. But if you're working on a piece of artwork that maybe isn't on Bristol, you might want to give the chipboard a coat of gesso either before you trace the pattern and cut it out or at this point. Also, I am planning to do a little paint work around the edges after I get these glued on. But if you like your trimmed artwork the way it is, you might want to just treat the edges of the chipboard a little bit, just in case they show when you drop the image in, but you don't have to. I'm just going to apply glue stick to the chipboard. And a little bit onto the artwork. Not a lot, just a little. You notice that I'm applying this so that I'm not running over the edges. That way I'm not getting glue on the front of my artwork as it moves around. And I'm going to move these off. Sandwich my glue in there. Now I've got a nice clean surface to work on. So I'm just going to slap this on there. I want to make sure that the image covers the chipboard completely. And once I get this brayer down, it's going to be just slightly larger than it needs to be. That's okay. Just a little wax paper to protect my artwork, and some brayering to make sure it's flat. Yeah, don't do that. Don't stick your wax paper in wet glue. So I'm folding my wax paper in half to sandwich that glue inside. And like I said, this is just slightly larger than it needs to be. So I'm just going to do a little artful trimming. Same thing. Apply the image, make sure it covers the chipboard. And brayer. And I'm brayering both to flatten it out and to make sure that there's good contact between the chipboard and the artwork. So I've done a test fit of this one, and all I really do is just drop it in and make sure that it fits in there, that I don't have to force it in to put it in. So that's what it's going to look like when I get it all glued together. But first I want to do a little paint work around the edges, just to provide a nice frame around the artwork. This is sort of like the edging that I did around the tins once I got the images glued on. I'm just doing this now before I glue it on. So I'm just using a little black to pat around this. And this would also work with chalk inks. You could also edge with a Sharpie by dragging the edge along the side of the tip of a Sharpie if you wanted to. Just something to give it a little frame before I glue it in. Last thing I want to do before I glue these in is give them a little sealer, just like I did with the pocket shrines. Just a very light coat of matte medium. And I'm flipping my sponge over, for those of you who use foam sponges like I do. Flipping it over because I don't want the color from this one to contaminate this one, since they are so different in color palettes. Don't really want red on my blue. Now I'm ready to glue my artwork into the tins. I've got my handy tube of E6000, which It's glued shut. I usually put a little swipe of Vaseline around the base to keep it from sticking like that, but apparently my Vaseline has failed, so I need to apply another dab. All right, so what I want to do is put some E6000 all around this piece. And I don't want to put it too close to the edge, because when I press it into the tin, it will gush out the sides, and then I'll have a bunch of stuff to wipe away, and that's kind of a drag. So just want to place it in there and tap it down. And if it doesn't seem like it's laying flat, a little glue on my fingers, so I'm using a paper towel to do this instead of my finger. If it doesn't seem like it's laying flat, like this edge right here seems like it's flipping up, I'm just going to grab some tubes of paint and put them in the corners. And it works better with tubes that have a lot of paint in them. You can use other stuff for this too. Like I've seen people do this with pie weights or marbles or whatever you have. That should be okay. I'm going to check on this every once in a while, make sure that the corners are laying down. It's really important for me because I know my next step is going to be doing a line of glue around the outside and laying some beads or something around the outside edges. So I don't want those beads sliding underneath, so I really want good contact with my edges. So all the way around the outside, usually do an X and then a cross. If you want to, you can use a credit card to smear this around so that it's all nice and even, but I don't have that kind of patience today. And I'm probably going to leave these overnight to dry, because anytime I glue to metal, it takes a little extra time for things to dry. So a little weight to keep this flat. This is the Vaseline trick for E6000. You clean off all the extra gunk and glue off of the tip, as much of it as you can. And you take a little Vaseline and you put it all around the threaded part of the tip. Don't get it up at the top where the glue comes out, just around the bottom. And then screw it down. And most of the time, this will keep the glue from sticking to the cap, and that way your cap doesn't glue itself to the tube.